Every workplace, whether it's a huge construction site or a quiet little office, has its own set of dangers, and a lot of them are hidden. So today, we're going to break down something called HIRARC. It's a really powerful but pretty simple system for sniffing out those dangers and dealing with them before anyone can get hurt.
Just for a second, think about where you work. What are the obvious dangers? Now, what about the not-so-obvious ones? Because, so many hazards are practically invisible right up until the moment an accident happens.
The great thing is, we don't have to just sit around and wait for something bad to happen. There's actually a structured, proactive way to get ahead of the game, a system that helps us find these issues, figure out how serious they are, and then control them.
And that system is called HIRARC. The name itself is actually an acronym, and it spells out a simple three-part process for making just about any workplace a whole lot safer.
It really works in a logical order. First, you find the potential problem. That's hazard identification. Then, you evaluate how serious that problem could be. That's your risk assessment. And finally, you figure out a solution and put it in place, and that's risk control. It's a really clear path from just seeing a problem to actually preventing it.
So, let's get our definition straight, starting with hazard. A hazard isn't the accident itself, okay? It's the potential for something bad to happen. Think of it as the source of the problem. A wet floor, a machine without a safety guard, maybe even just a really poorly set up desk. It's anything that could cause harm.
Now, a hazard only really becomes a risk when we look at it through two lenses. First, what is the likelihood or the chance of that hazard causing an accident? And second, if it does happen, what's the severity going to be? How bad is the damage? A puddle of water on the floor is a hazard, but the risk becomes really high if that puddle is in the middle of a busy hallway.
Okay, so how do we actually do this? How do we put it into practice? Well, the official guidelines break the whole HIRARC system down into 4 practical steps. It takes you from the very beginning all the way to putting real safety measures in place.
The whole process starts pretty broad. You classify all the different work activities just to make sure you don't miss anything. Then, you start to zoom in, identifying the specific hazards tied to each task. After that, you do the risk assessment we just talked about, weighing likelihood against severity. And then, finally, you apply the right control measures to make that job safe.
To make this all feel a bit more real, let's follow an example right from the official guidelines. We're going to imagine a team of workers doing plastering on the outside of a building. This will help us see how each step works in the real world.
At its heart, risk assessment is really a balancing act between two key questions. On one side, you've got likelihood. How likely is it that something goes wrong? On the other side, you've got severity. And if it does go wrong, how bad is it going to be? You've got to consider both to really understand the danger.
And this is how those two things, likelihood and severity, come together. It's called a risk matrix. As you can see, if something is very likely to happen and the outcome would be major, well, that falls right into the high-risk category. This simple grid is so powerful because it tells you at a glance which dangers you need to deal with right now.
And that's really the bottom line here. Once you do your assessment, any hazard that ends up in that high-risk zone is not something you can just add to a to-do list for next week. It demands immediate action to keep people safe. Period.
So, once you've found and prioritized your risks, it's time for the most important part of the whole process, actually controlling them. This is where you actually make the workplace safer.
Now, not all solutions are created equal. There's actually a hierarchy. The absolute best solutions are engineering controls, things that physically change the environment, like adding a guard to a machine. Next up are administrative controls, which change how people work, like bringing in new safety rules. And the very last line of defense is personal protective equipment, or PPE.
And here's something you can't forget. It's not enough to just do the work. You have to document everything. Keeping good records is absolutely essential for tracking your progress, for accountability, and of course, for legal reasons. In the world of safety, if it isn't written down, it might as well have never happened.
And this is basically what that documentation looks like. The official HIRARC form captures everything you need: the work activity, the hazard, your risk calculation, and most importantly, the recommended solutions and the person in charge, or PIC, who is responsible for making sure it gets done. It's an entire action plan on a single page.
One of the biggest things to remember is that workplace safety is never really done. HIRRC is not a one-time project that you finish, file away, and then forget about. It has to be a continuous cycle of reviewing and improving, because our workplaces are always changing.
So, how often do you need to do this?
Well, the official guidelines suggest doing a full review of your HIRRC documents at least every 3 years. But you should also do it anytime there's a big change, like you get new equipment, you introduce new procedures, or, of course, after any kind of incident happens.
So, now that we've worked through the whole process, let's come back to the biggest question of all. Why does HIRARC even matter? What's the real payoff for all this work?
At the end of the day, HIRARC is all about being proactive instead of reactive. It's about building a system that protects a company's most valuable asset, its people. It's a structured way to make sure that everyone gets to go home safe.
And this is such a critical point. This whole process works best when you involve the people who are actually doing the jobs every single day. They are the real experts on the risks they face, and their knowledge is absolutely priceless.
So, I'll leave you with this question. Now that you have the framework, what's one small hazard in your own workplace that you can identify, assess, and actually do something about? Because creating a safer workplace really does start with that one first step.